Super Mario Bros. Wonder has been out for less than 2 months, and in that time, a level editor has been developed for the game that is now functional to the point where I made my second custom Wonder level with it this week. That editor is called Fushigi, because that means wonder and some other stuff in Japanese or whatever. And today I'll be showing you how I made a level using it. This won't be a tutorial. I'm open to the idea of doing tutorials about this stuff in the future, but for now modding tools and methods are still developing and changing every day. So if I made a tutorial on how to do any of this stuff now, it would be outdated before I even upload it. Anyways, let's start working on that level. This is a time-lapse of most of the level creation process. All in all, it took me about 8 hours to make the level, and that's being condensed down to only a few minutes here. So, welcome to Fushigi. As you can see, a lot of objects are being displayed using renders of their in-game models, but in the version I used to make this level, the terrain didn't have that feature yet, so that's what those blue chunks are. In general, I'd actually barely used Fushigi before making this level, so getting used to the editor was one of the main reasons why I wanted to make this level in the first place. I decided to use spikes and countdown platforms for this level because I thought those elements could probably have a lot of interesting interactions, and I think I was right about that in hindsight. I always try to come up with as much of the level as possible ahead of time, so I don't have to come up with stuff on the fly as much. For this level, I'd basically figured out all of the broad strokes before I even started working on the level, but as is to be expected, a lot of plans also changed along the way. For example, I knew that I wanted the level to end with a Goomba transformation segment, but when I started working on the level, I hadn't really thought of a way of making that feel like it didn't come out of nowhere. I ended up deciding to use a few Goomba pipe generators throughout the level because of this. Something I do a lot when making levels is hiding groups of coins all over the place. This is both a good way of encouraging the player to look for secrets and also a nice way of making your levels feel less empty. However, I do think I maybe overdid it in a few places, which maybe made some of this level segments feel a bit too crowded occasionally. Also, just like in general, I'm definitely still not that used to certain level design things that Wonder uses a lot. Like the Wonder Buds, I don't use those nearly as much as Nintendo did when designing their levels. At one point, the level was also going to feature red power blocks, and I still think having enemies trigger power blocks could be a compelling mechanic for a level, but I ended up deciding that the level already had enough stuff going on and scrapped the section where I introduced that mechanic. Still, it's cool to think about designing a Goomba transformation section where you can actually kill enemies by hitting power blocks or something like that. Why this level ended up using a lot of piranha plants is actually quite interesting. You see, I was originally planning on having a purple 10 coin require you to get a spike to kill piranha plants that would block your path. So, just like with the Goombas, I felt that I needed to justify using piranha plants in that section by having more piranha plants throughout the level. The funny thing is that I ended up scrapping that planned piranha plant section altogether, so in the end the only purpose that the piranha plants in this level really serve is to make sure the level isn't just all spike spam. I knew I wanted to have some stuff towards the end of the level that involved munchers, so I had to make sure to include munchers in other sections of the level as well. In general, this level ended up being really long, or at least that's what it felt like when I was designing it, though that could also be because I'm just used to designing Luigi U levels. That's also part of the reason why the level as a whole might feel a bit cramped, because I'm used to making levels that basically have to be as compact as possible. I'm a big fan of color coding pipes in my levels, so in this level the red pipes are the generic ones, the yellow pipes are the enemy generator pipes, and the green ones are enterable. In fact, speaking of enterable pipes, I knew from the start that I wanted to include a bonus room in this level, and I was also pretty certain it would be a background bonus room, mostly just because that would look cool. So from knowing that, I sort of reverse engineered a reason for it to be a background bonus room, which is that the section ended up requiring you to jump on Goombas that spawn from a pipe, and you can see them filling up the room in the background before you're able to go to the section yourself. It ended up being quite a cool little setup in my opinion. It's super impressive to me that Fushigi is as functional as it is already, but there were still some things that I had to do with the good old text editor technique because Fushigi didn't support editing that stuff yet. There was one thing involving the wonder effect towards the end of the level in particular that took me several hours to figure out, but at least once I discovered the problem, I reported it to the Fushigi developers, and I believe it's something that will be fixed for the next release. Another thing Fushigi still can't really do, as far as I'm aware, is properly give collisions to semi-solid platforms, so I decided decided to just not deal with that stuff at all by using these pre-made Savannah platforms. I remember before really coming up with what this level was going to be like design-wise, I did have some pretty ambitious ideas for its theming, but in the end I decided to just stick to the vanilla look, mostly out of laziness. Wonder's levels have a bit of a different flow in terms of level design compared to the new Super Mario Bros. Games, mostly thanks to the Wonder Flower. Whereas for something like a new Super Mario Bros. U level, it's normal to have the climax of the level's mechanics be at the end of the level. For Wonder levels, like the one I'm making here, it works a bit differently. Like for this level, the ultimate extent of the stuff done with the level's mechanics is reached like 2/3 of the way through, because at that point, the player gets the Wonder Flower. The Wonder segments are usually either an extension of or a twist upon the level's mechanics. In the case of my level, the Wonder Flower is a twist because now you're interacting with the same mechanics but with a limited moveset. The weird thing about this is that Wonder Flowers are usually optional, so I also had to make sure that this final third of the level would still be satisfying to play even if you're not a Goomba. It's a really weird level design puzzle to solve, but it's something I was aware of ahead of time, so I made sure to design my level with this in mind. Something cool that the Wonder Flower allows you to do is spawn and despawn basically any level element throughout the Wonder effect. So I was able to place enemies in the Goomba section that would only make it more difficult if you played it without actually being a Goomba, because they'd get despawned if you triggered the Wonder effect. To be honest, I did sort of run out of ideas for what to do with the level after the Wonder effect, though that wasn't a big deal because that's also where most of the original game's levels wrap things up, and that's also what I did. When it came to judging the level length, I did something super simple, because when starting work on this level, I just emptied the level Here Come the Hoppos, but I kept the goal pole at the end, so I had that as a reference point. Once I'd reached the goal pole and made an appropriate challenge that allowed the player to reach the top, it was time to go back through the level and do some finishing touches. For example, something I hadn't done at all throughout the level creation process so far was add bits of decoration to the ground. So things like the taller pieces of grass or the bushes were only added at this point. I didn't record it for the time lapse, but once I was done working on that stuff, I also added some talking flowers throughout the level. I took their voice lines from other random levels. Anyways, the level is done, so let's check it out in-game. That mushroom there is kind of funny because there's this badge in the game that also gives you a mushroom if you start out in the level. And yeah, me adding mushrooms to the starts of my levels, like I should just stop doing that because of that. Anyways, of course, we reinforced the main mechanics towards the start here with the countdown platforms and the spike and whatnot. And we already have this, this 10 coin here is actually quite early, and it's actually quite tricky to get this with the way the elephant like ducks down beneath that. I think it actually slows you down a little bit as well. But, you know, that only makes it a little bit more challenging, I suppose, which is fine because it's actually quite easy. And this setup here, of course, kind of shows why having spikes and countdown platforms in the same level is a cool idea that I came up with, because you can do cool setups like that. I don't think I ever showed this this hidden block setup there before, but yeah, that's a Luigi-styled hidden question mark block, and then with a completely hidden question mark block above it as well. Kind of funny. It is kind of a shame that the elephant suit kind of like makes piranha plants not a threat at all. So you can just like get rid of the even the big piranha plants in one hit, which is yeah just a little bit overpowered. And here's this funny setup where originally I was just going to have this spike hit a POW block that was going to destroy those brick blocks, but then I realized that spike could actually destroy all those brick blocks just on his own, so that worked out pretty well. I did consider hiding something up here, but I couldn't really figure out how. It's funny how the flower here says that, and that's just from some other random level. But I realized, of course, that wouldn't make any sense if you respawned here from the midway. So if we die, you'll see he actually says something else. And I actually do that by having a like little trigger area over here. So if you go back over to the left here and then go back to the right, and now of course you're doing the tricky thing again, then he'll once again say the appropriate line. So I think that's just a kind of a funny little setup. And there's stuff like that all over the original game as well. Those coins there are kind of nice, the way it kind of forces you to sort of wait for just the last second to get those. I quite like that. And then here we kind of have a repeat of the other setup, where you can, well, now you have to actually manually like lower the spike down onto the semi-solid, and then he once again destroys those brick blocks like that. And I like how I kind of repeat the exact same setup there, but this time you actually have to be like an active participant in like making sure the spike does that, and that allows you to get this second 10 coin. in general, that whole like Goomba jumping thing there is actually not that tricky on its own. It's just a little bit more tricky because of the way it's in the background and stuff. And yeah, that flower there, of course, is kind of funny. Of course, there is also something like that at the start of the original Countdown platform level in the original game in World 2. But whatever, I guess a lot of people forgot about that because I still got a lot of comments saying that was very funny. And yeah, here we have the Wonder Effect going down the Countdown platforms as well. Of course, that's appropriate, and I was very happy to see that that actually worked like that. There's a lot of cool stuff in this game where things just kind of work out between like interactions of different elements. It makes me really happy to see that. And yeah, I mean, it's a pretty standard Goomba section, honestly. Though, I mean, there aren't even that many Goomba sections in the original game, so I think it's a fine thing for a custom level to do. And yeah, it just makes for a nice little, like, sort of a stealth almost section where you have to avoid those spike balls. But here's something satisfying where you can of course kill the spike, and that just sort of like naturally happened that I realized like, oh, if I put some platforms here, then you could actually walk all the way back over to the left and kill that spike. And so I made that the third 10 coin, even though I originally had some different plans for that. And then here's just sort of a more like tricky version of a similar setup we had towards the beginning of the level, but now you're a Goomba, so that makes it extra challenging, I guess. And from here on out, it's just a little bit of a stroll to the Wonder Seed, which I think is fine. And it's also funny, I think, to force the player to trigger those countdown platforms multiple times as a Goomba, because it's kind of finicky, honestly. Something you have to keep in mind, of course, is that to the left there, that whole section changes depending on whether you get the Wonder Seed or not. So maybe I'll show the non-Wonder Flower version after we're done here with the main section of the level. And yeah, I mean, there's actually not that much left. We just have a pretty standard gold ball setup here, where the spike triggers that countdown platform. But of course, you can also just kill it and get the top of the flagpole very easily. But yeah, I suppose before we call it quits for today, I should also show you guys the non-Wonder Flower version of the like last third of the level there. Alright, welcome back. So we're skipping the Wonder Flower, and now you can see what this section is like if you're not a Goomba. And I mean, it's still way easier, of course, but you're also not getting the third 10 coin, and you're not getting the Wonder Seed, so I think that's fine. But yeah, here, these spikes are still a bit of a menace, I suppose, and those get spawned in if you're not a Goomba. And as you can see, yeah, that Wonder Bud that spawns the last 10 coin, that's all missing if you don't get the Wonder Flower. And I think that's fine, because, of course, it would be way too easy otherwise. These piranha plants obviously spawn in if you're not in the Goomba transformation, and they just make for a little different kind of threat for this section here. And then here, this whole segment is also quite different, because now we have two spikes up above, and we have this countdown platform that actually has, like, you have to go all the way down from 10 to 0 to trigger it so you can fall down over here. And that just makes for a completely different type of section with, like, still mostly the same tiling and stuff, and I quite like that. Once again, there's nothing here if I kill that spike. I should probably have added something there, but whatever. Still, like I said, that section, it might not be as tricky without being a Goomba, but it's still something at least. It still kind of functions as an end of a level. But yeah, anyway, speaking of endings, I think that's the end of this video, guys. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and consider subscribing, or maybe consider joining the Wonderland Discord server, which will be linked down in the description. But anyways, guys, see you later, and bye-bye.